Emily Carter, a determined businesswoman, walks into Regal Bank with a mission to create opportunities for those overlooked and undervalued. But she quickly finds herself confronting more than just corporate policies. Beneath the bank's polished exterior lies a culture steeped in exclusion, and one man in particular, Thomas Reeves, stands as a symbol of its unyielding resistance. Amid dismissals and whispered doubts, Emily's path collides with an unlikely ally, Ben Porter, a quiet security guard whose small act of kindness plants the seed for a much larger transformation. Together, they face mounting challenges, from calculated sabotage to deeply ingrained biases. Can Emily's resolve and Ben's quiet strength dismantle years of systemic inequality? And what happens when those who resist change are forced to confront their own biases? Emily Carter adjusted her scarf against the biting November wind as she approached the stately building of Regal Bank, her steps purposeful but heavy. The grand marble columns and polished glass doors reflected her determined expression, though inside she carried the weight of years of struggle. This day was supposed to be about progress, another step toward proving her place in a world that often reminded her she did not belong. Yet, even as she climbed the stone steps, her mind churned with doubts. Emily had spent the better part of her career navigating a maze of glass ceilings and silent judgments. Raised by a single mother in a modest home in Chicago's South Side, Emily knew the value of hard work. Her mother, an elementary school teacher, had often worked late into the night grading papers while encouraging Emily to dream beyond their small neighborhood. "You will face challenges, Emily," her mother had often said, "but do not let anyone make you feel small. You belong in any room you walk into." Those words had been her anchor, especially during her early years in corporate America. But even with a stellar record of achievements and her promotion to regional director of operations for a leading consulting firm, Emily still encountered the dismissive glances, the too quick interruptions, and the unspoken expectation that she proves herself again and again. Today, Emily was at Regal Bank for a meeting she had fought hard to arrange. She intended to propose a partnership that could open doors for underfunded minority-owned businesses, a cause deeply personal to her. Inside the bank, the lobby gleamed under soft golden lights, and polished floors echoed the muffled sounds of business. She approached the reception desk, her tailored navy blazer immaculate, her laptop bag slung neatly over her shoulder. "Good morning," Emily said with a polite smile. "I am Emily Carter, here for a meeting with Mr. Harris and the executive board." The receptionist, a young man named Aaron, glanced at her briefly before returning to his screen. "One moment," he mumbled. As Emily waited, she noticed a man in a charcoal suit lingering near the corner of the desk. His name tag read, Thomas Reeves, branch manager. Reeves was in his 50s, with a meticulously groomed appearance that spoke of authority and privilege. When their eyes met, his expression was unreadable, but as his gaze swept over her, Emily felt the all-too-familiar chill of dismissal. After a long pause, Reeves stepped forward, his tone clipped. "Can I help you with something?" "Yes," Emily replied, keeping her voice steady. "I have a scheduled meeting with the executive board." Reeves raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure about that? We do not typically meet with visitors without prior verification." Emily's polite smile wavered, but she held firm. "It is on the schedule. I confirmed it myself last week." He gave a dismissive chuckle. "I see. Well, let me check again." As Reeves turned to Aaron, Emily noticed a security guard nearby, a middle-aged man with kind eyes who was watching the exchange. His uniform was pressed, but his posture was relaxed, as though he had seen this scenario play out before. "Excuse me, ma'am," the guard said softly as Reeves walked away. "Do you have your appointment confirmation? I can help make sure it gets to the right person." Emily hesitated, then nodded, pulling out her phone to show the email. The guard, whose name tag read Ben Porter, studied the confirmation carefully. "You're all set," Ben said, his voice steady and reassuring. "Let me escort you to the conference room." Ben's unexpected kindness was a balm to Emily's rising frustration. While Reeves muttered something inaudible and dismissive as they passed, Ben walked with her to the elevator, pressing the button for the top floor. "I know it is not my place to say," Ben said after a moment, his tone quiet, "but I hope your meeting goes well. People like you are the reason I keep showing up here." Emily blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you," she said, her voice softening. "That means a lot." As the elevator doors closed, she found herself reflecting on the interaction. Ben's simple act of kindness had eased the tension in her chest, reminding her of the importance of allies in unexpected places. Upstairs, Emily's meeting began with polite greetings and guarded conversations. She presented her proposal with the confidence and professionalism she had honed over years of experience. Though there were moments of resistance, she made her case with facts and passion, emphasizing the tangible benefits of supporting minority-owned businesses. By the end of the meeting, Mr. Harris, the senior executive, nodded with approval. "This is compelling," he admitted. "We will review the details and circle back within the week." Emily thanked them and exited the room with a mix of relief and exhaustion. Her encounter with Reeves lingered in her mind, but so did Ben's kindness. As she descended in the elevator, Emily resolved to acknowledge Ben's gesture. She found him at his post by the main entrance and approached with a smile. "Ben," she said, holding out her hand, "thank you for your help earlier. You did not have to step in, but you did." Ben looked surprised but shook her hand firmly. "It was nothing, ma'am. Just doing my job." "It was more than that," Emily insisted. "You treated me with respect when others chose not to. That matters." Ben's eyes softened, and for a moment they shared a quiet understanding. When Emily returned to her car, she sat for a moment, letting the day's events settle. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind once more. "You belong in any room you walk into." That day, Emily wrote a short thank you note to Ben, slipping it to the receptionist to deliver on her way out. It was a small gesture, but it felt important, just as his kindness had been to her. The following morning, as the city came alive with the hum of traffic and hurried footsteps, Ben stood at his post, the note in his pocket. He reread it, feeling a quiet pride he had not felt in years. Sometimes, he thought, the smallest acts of kindness can set the biggest changes in motion. Emily Carter stared out her apartment window as dawn's first light cast a soft glow over the city. Her home, a tidy space filled with books and framed photos of family, reflected her organized and determined personality. She had worked hard to afford this place, a modest but comfortable apartment on the quieter side of Chicago, far removed from the chaos of her childhood neighborhood. Yet, as she sipped her coffee, the events at Regal Bank replayed in her mind, clouding the satisfaction she usually felt from progress. Thomas Reeves's condescension was not new to her. Over the years, Emily had faced countless moments where she was underestimated, dismissed, or outright disrespected, but something about yesterday lingered longer than usual. Perhaps it was the way Reeves had seemed so certain of his assumptions about her, as though his judgment was absolute. She set her coffee mug on the counter and shook her head, refusing to let his behavior define her. "You are more than their assumptions," she reminded herself. Still, a quiet ache remained. Her phone buzzed on the counter, snapping her from her thoughts. It was an email from the executive board at Regal Bank. She hesitated before opening it, half expecting a rejection. Instead, the message confirmed they were seriously considering her proposal. A small smile tugged at her lips. One step forward, she thought. But even as she celebrated the progress, a pang of doubt crept in. She knew this was just the beginning, and the road ahead would be filled with challenges. Later that morning, Ben Porter stood at his usual post in the lobby of Regal Bank. He had been replaying the events of the previous day too, but for a different reason. Emily Carter's thank you note, now folded neatly in his pocket, had struck a chord in him. It was rare for anyone to acknowledge his work, let alone thank him. Ben had worked as a security guard for over 15 years. He was a quiet man, more comfortable observing than speaking, but he carried a strong moral compass. He had seen countless people like Emily, capable, dignified individuals, dismissed by those in power. For years, he had felt powerless to do anything about it, but yesterday, something had shifted. He watched as Thomas Reeves strolled into the lobby, his posture stiff with authority. Ben's jaw tightened. Reeves's arrogance grated on him, especially after witnessing how he had treated Emily. "Good morning, Ben," Reeves said curtly, barely glancing his way. Ben nodded, but said nothing, his thoughts racing. For years, he had stayed in the background, doing his job without question. But seeing Emily's courage had sparked something in him, a realization that even small actions could make a difference. That same afternoon, Emily returned to the bank for a follow-up discussion. As she walked through the lobby, her eyes met Ben's. He offered her a small nod, and she smiled, the quiet acknowledgement bolstering her confidence. Thomas Reeves was at the front desk, speaking to the receptionist when Emily approached. His expression shifted the moment he saw her, a flicker of discomfort betraying his usual composure. "Ms. Carter," he said, forcing a tight smile. "Back so soon?" "Yes," Emily replied evenly. "I have a follow-up meeting regarding the proposal." Reeves's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Of course. Let me escort you." As they walked toward the elevator, Reeves attempted small talk, but his words felt hollow. Emily responded politely but kept her distance. She could sense his unease, though she was unsure if it stemmed from guilt or fear. When they reached the conference room, Reeves lingered awkwardly at the door before stepping aside. Emily entered, her focus immediately shifting to the task at hand. After her meeting, Emily lingered in the lobby, waiting for her car service. She noticed Ben watching her from his post, and on impulse, she approached him. "Ben," she said, her tone warm, "thank you again for yesterday. I do not think I said it enough." Ben smiled, a rare but genuine expression. "You do not need to thank me, ma'am. Just doing what felt right." "Still," Emily said, "it mattered." Ben hesitated, then leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "If you do not mind me saying, I admire what you are doing here. People notice more than you think." Emily tilted her head, curious. "What do you mean?" Ben glanced around the lobby before speaking. "There are people in this building who do not feel like they belong. Staff, customers, even me, sometimes. What you are doing gives us hope." Emily was struck by his honesty. She had always known her work was important, but hearing it framed this way added weight to her mission. "I appreciate that, Ben," she said sincerely. "And if there is ever anything I can do for you, let me know." Ben nodded, his respect for her deepening. Later that evening, Emily sat in her apartment, reflecting on Ben's words. She thought about the countless people who had been overlooked, dismissed, or made to feel invisible just like her. For years, she had focused on achieving her own goals, but now she realized her work had the potential to create a ripple effect far beyond herself. Her thoughts drifted to Ben. His quiet kindness had reminded her of something she had nearly forgotten, that allies often appear in unexpected places. Determined to pay it forward, Emily opened her laptop and began drafting a mentorship program proposal. The program would focus on supporting underrepresented employees within the bank, providing them with the tools and confidence to thrive. As she typed, a sense of purpose washed over her. The sting of Reeves's earlier dismissal still lingered, but it no longer consumed her. Instead, it fueled her resolve. The next morning, Ben arrived at work to find a small envelope waiting for him at his post. Inside was a card with Emily's name and a handwritten message. "Ben, Your kindness reminded me of the importance of small actions. Thank you for showing me that change begins with people like you. Best regards, Emily Carter. Ben read the note twice, a rare warmth spreading through him. For years, he had felt like his efforts went unnoticed, but now he realized that even the smallest gestures could make a difference. As he folded the note and tucked it into his pocket, Ben resolved to do more, not just for Emily, but for everyone who needed someone to stand in their corner. The rhythm of life at Regal Bank continued as usual. Polished floors echoed the hurried steps of employees, clients discussed investments in hushed tones, and Thomas Reeves maintained his air of authority. But beneath the surface, subtle changes were beginning to stir. Ben Porter kept the card Emily had given him folded in his pocket. Every so often, he would take it out, reread her words, and feel a renewed sense of purpose. Her acknowledgement had been a reminder that even in his quiet role, he could influence lives in meaningful ways. That morning, as Ben adjusted his uniform at his post, he overheard Reeves speaking loudly near the reception desk. "Honestly, I do not understand all the fuss over that woman's proposal," Reeves muttered to a colleague, his voice carrying just far enough for Ben to catch. "These partnerships are distractions. We should be focusing on more serious clients." Ben felt his jaw tighten. He had no illusions about Reeves's character, but his disdainful tone grated more than usual. Ben had seen how hard Emily worked, and how gracefully she had carried herself, despite Reeves's attempts to diminish her. For years, Ben had remained on the sidelines, observing injustices, but never stepping out of line. But now, something inside him had shifted. He couldn't shake the thought that Emily's courage deserved more than silent support. That afternoon, Emily returned to the bank for another follow-up meeting. As she passed through the lobby, she noticed Ben standing by the entrance, his usual calm demeanor slightly tense. "Ben," she said, pausing to greet him. "How are you?" "I'm good, ma'am," he replied, his voice steady but quieter than usual. "And you?" "I'm well," Emily said. "Is everything all right?" Ben hesitated, glancing around before lowering his voice. "There's something you should know. I overheard Mr. Reeves speaking about your proposal earlier. He doesn't seem supportive." Emily wasn't surprised, but the confirmation still stung. "Thank you for letting me know," she said, her tone composed. "I had a feeling he might resist." Ben nodded, his eyes serious. "If there's anything I can do to help, you just say the word." His sincerity caught Emily off guard. She studied him for a moment before replying, "I appreciate that, Ben. It means a lot." Upstairs, Emily's meeting with the executive board was productive, but tense. Mr. Harris, one of the senior members, seemed intrigued by her proposal, but raised several pointed questions about its feasibility. Emily answered them with poise, presenting clear data and a passionate case for why the initiative was necessary. By the end of the meeting, Harris leaned back in his chair, nodding thoughtfully. "You make a compelling argument, Ms. Carter. I'll review this further and follow up next week." Emily thanked him and left the room, her steps light, but her mind heavy. She knew she was making progress, but she also knew there were forces within the bank working against her. As she stepped into the elevator, she thought about Ben's offer to help. His quiet strength and willingness to stand by her side gave her a flicker of hope. Allies like him were rare, but their support could make all the difference. Meanwhile, Ben was busy gathering information. Over the years, he had built a reputation as someone people could trust, and his position at the bank gave him access to insights others often overlooked. He began discreetly speaking to employees, listening to their experiences and concerns. One afternoon, he struck up a conversation with Sarah, a young teller who had been at the bank for 2 years. "Hey, Sarah," Ben said, leaning casually against the counter. "How's it going?" Sarah glanced around nervously before replying, "It's fine, I guess. Why do you ask?" Ben smiled reassuringly. "Just curious. You've been quiet lately. Everything okay? Sarah hesitated before sighing. Not really. It's just hard sometimes. I feel like no matter how hard I work, I'll never move up here. People like me aren't exactly the type they want in higher positions. Ben frowned. That doesn't sound right. You're one of the hardest workers here. Sarah shrugged. Maybe, but it doesn't seem to matter. People like Mr. Reeves only see what they want to see. Her words stayed with Ben. Sarah's experience mirrored so many others he had heard over the years. He realized that the culture at Regal Bank was deeply flawed. And it wasn't just affecting clients like Emily, it was affecting employees too. That evening, Ben sat in his small apartment, surrounded by the quiet hum of city life. His home was modest but comfortable, filled with framed photos of his family and a few well-worn books on leadership and community building. As he thought about Sarah's words and Emily's resilience, he felt a growing determination. He couldn't fix everything, but he could do something. Ben spent hours writing a detailed report, compiling stories he had heard from employees and clients alike. He included Sarah's struggles, Emily's proposal, and his own observations about the bank's culture. The report was raw and honest, calling out systemic issues while offering solutions. When he finished, Ben slipped the report into an envelope and addressed it to Emily Carter. He knew she was the one person who could use this information to create real change. The next morning, Emily arrived at the bank to find an envelope waiting for her at reception. Inside was Ben's report, along with a handwritten note. Ms. Carter, I've seen how hard you've worked, and I believe in what you're trying to do. Here is some information I think might help your case. Thank you for showing us what true leadership looks like. Best regards, Ben Porter. Emily read the note twice, her heart swelling with gratitude. Ben's courage and belief in her mission bolstered her resolve. She spent the rest of the day reviewing the report, moved by the stories and insights Ben had shared. It was clear that change was needed not just for her proposal, but for the entire culture of the bank. As she prepared for her next meeting with the executive board, Emily knew she had an unexpected ally in Ben. His quiet strength and willingness to stand up for what was right reminded her that even the smallest acts of kindness could lead to profound change. Emily Carter sat in her apartment, Ben's report spread across the dining table. The weight of the stories within it pressed heavily on her mind. Sarah's frustrations, the dismissive attitudes of leadership, and the systemic biases were laid bare in black and white. Ben had given her more than just evidence. He had provided a glimpse into the quiet struggles of those who felt unseen and unheard. Emily's laptop hummed softly as she added the final touches to her presentation. Her proposal to the executive board had just grown more ambitious. She would not only advocate for minority-owned business partnerships, but also push for internal reforms within Regal Bank. She leaned back in her chair, her mother's words echoing in her mind once more. You belong in any room you walk into. Emily knew this fight would not be easy, but she also knew it was necessary. The next day, Emily entered the bank with a renewed sense of purpose. Her heels clicked against the polished floor as she made her way to the elevator. She passed Ben at his post, offering him a small smile. "Thank you for the report," she said quietly. "It was exactly what I needed." Ben nodded, his expression calm but resolute, glad it could help. When she reached the boardroom, the atmosphere was as formal and imposing as ever. The senior executives sat around the long mahogany table, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Mr. Harris, the senior executive known for his conservative views, eyed her with a polite but wary gaze. "Ms. Carter," Harris began, his voice measured, "we're eager to hear what you have prepared for us today." Emily nodded and began her presentation. She outlined the benefits of partnering with minority-owned businesses, emphasizing the economic and social value it would bring to the bank. Then, as she clicked to the next slide, she transitioned seamlessly into discussing internal reforms. I believe our external partnerships are only part of the equation, Emily said, her tone steady but firm. To truly lead the way in inclusivity and innovation, we must also examine our internal practices. The room grew noticeably quieter. Emily continued, citing examples from Ben's report without naming specific individuals. She spoke about the unspoken hierarchies that made employees like Sarah feel undervalued, and the subtle biases that shaped client interactions. Harris leaned forward slightly, his brow furrowing. Ms. Carter, these are significant accusations. Are you certain these issues are widespread? I am, Emily replied, meeting his gaze. This isn't just about individual behavior. It's about a culture that has been allowed to persist for far too long. If we address it, we have the opportunity to set a new standard, not just for our employees, but for our clients as well. Harris exchanged a glance with another board member, his expression unreadable. I understand this is a bold proposition, Emily continued, but bold changes are necessary if we want to remain competitive in a world that values equity and inclusion. After the meeting, Emily felt a mix of relief and apprehension. She had made her case, but she knew it was only the beginning. As she waited for the elevator, Harris approached her, his expression contemplative. Ms. Carter, he said, you've given us a lot to think about. I'll admit, I wasn't expecting this level of candor. Sometimes candor is what's needed, Emily replied, her voice calm but resolute. Harris nodded slowly. We'll reconvene next week to discuss your proposals further. In the meantime, I suggest you be prepared for some pushback. I'm always prepared, Emily said, a small smile tugging at her lips. As the week unfolded, Emily's proposals became the talk of the bank. Some employees, like Sarah, were inspired and hopeful, while others were skeptical or outright resistant. In the break room, Sarah overheard two colleagues discussing Emily's presentation. She's ambitious, I'll give her that, one said. But do you really think these changes are necessary? The other shrugged. I don't know. Maybe it's about time someone shook things up. Sarah felt a flicker of pride. For the first time, she saw a glimmer of possibility for change, not just for herself, but for everyone who had felt sidelined. Meanwhile, Thomas Reeves was not pleased. He had heard about Emily's push for reforms and saw it as a direct challenge to his authority. He spent the week quietly rallying a group of like-minded employees, arguing that Emily's proposals were disruptive and unnecessary. One afternoon, Reeves cornered Ben near the lobby. I've been hearing a lot about this Carter woman, Reeves said, his tone dismissive. She's making waves, but I'm not convinced they're the kind we need. Ben remained calm, his expression neutral. She's addressing issues that have been ignored for years. That seems important to me. Reeves scoffed. Important? Or just stirring the pot? Mark my words, Ben. This kind of disruption rarely ends well. Ben didn't reply, but his silence spoke volumes. As the days passed, Emily continued to refine her plans, leaning on Ben and Sarah for insights and support. She knew the resistance she faced was not just about her proposals, it was about challenging a deeply ingrained culture. One evening, Sarah approached Emily as she was leaving the office. Ms. Carter, Sarah said hesitantly, can I talk to you for a moment? Of course, Emily said, stopping to listen. I just wanted to thank you, Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. For what you're doing. It means a lot to people like me. Emily placed a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder. You belong here, Sarah. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. Sarah nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. By the end of the week, Emily received an email from Harris. The executive board had agreed to move forward with discussions on both her proposals. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. As she sat in her apartment that evening, Emily reflected on the journey so far. The challenges had been daunting, but the kindness and support of people like Ben and Sarah had kept her moving forward. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, But for the first time in a long while, she felt a deep sense of hope. Change was possible, and she was determined to see it through. The following week, the atmosphere at Regal Bank was electric with anticipation. Emily Carter's proposals had ignited conversations in every corner of the organization. Employees whispered in hallways, debated in break rooms, and watched closely as their leadership deliberated over the bold changes she had put forward. Emily walked into the bank that morning, her confidence steady but tempered, with the awareness that not everyone shared her vision. She nodded at Ben Porter as she passed his post, their shared understanding unspoken but clear. Ben tipped his head slightly in acknowledgement, a silent show of solidarity. In the break room, Sarah sat at a small round table, nervously picking at a muffin. Across from her, a colleague named Julie stirred her coffee, her expression skeptical. "I just don't see how this is going to work," Julie said, shaking her head. "They're asking for too much too fast. This isn't how we've done things around here." Sarah looked up, her voice tentative but firm. "Maybe that's the point. How we've done things hasn't worked for everyone." Julie frowned. "And you think one person can change all of that?" Sarah thought about Emily and Ben, about the quiet courage they had both shown in the face of opposition. "I think she's already started," Sarah replied softly. That morning, the bank's executive board held a meeting to discuss the next steps for Emily's proposals. As they debated the merits of her plans, Mr. Harris leaned back in his chair, watching the room with a calculating gaze. "While I understand the intention behind Ms. Carter's proposals," Harris said, his tone measured, "we must consider the potential risks of implementing such sweeping changes. Not everyone will be comfortable with this direction." Mrs. Donovan, a senior board member known for her progressive views, interjected. "Change is rarely comfortable, Mr. Harris, but if we want to remain relevant and do what is right, this is the path forward." The room murmured in agreement, though Harris's expression remained guarded. Meanwhile, Emily gathered a group of employees in one of the bank's smaller conference rooms. She had invited anyone interested in discussing the proposals to join her for an open forum. To her surprise, the room was nearly full. Employees from various departments had shown up, some eager, others cautiously curious. Sarah sat near the front, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Ben leaned against the back wall, his steady presence grounding Emily as she stood to address the group. "Thank you all for coming," Emily began, her voice clear and steady. "I wanted to create a space where we could talk openly about the changes we're proposing and what they mean for all of us." A man in the middle row raised his hand. "What if we don't agree with all the changes? Will our concerns be heard?" "Absolutely," Emily said. "This isn't about forcing anyone into a box. It's about creating an environment where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, clients and employees alike. Your voices are a crucial part of that." The man nodded, his skepticism softening slightly. Emily opened the floor for discussion, and gradually, the employees began sharing their thoughts. Some voiced concerns about how the changes might disrupt workflows, while others shared personal experiences that underscored the need for reform. Toward the end of the session, Sarah raised her hand hesitantly. "I've been here for 2 years," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "and for most of that time, I felt like I didn't belong. No matter how hard I worked, it seemed like there was always an unspoken rule that people like me didn't move up." The room grew quiet as Sarah continued, her courage growing with each word. "But when Ms. Carter came here and started talking about change, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Hope. I think these changes are exactly what we need." A few employees nodded in agreement, their expressions thoughtful. When the session ended, Emily thanked everyone for their time and encouraged them to reach out with any additional thoughts or concerns. As the employees filed out, Ben approached her. "You handled that well," he said simply. "Thank you," Emily replied, her voice tinged with relief. Sarah's bravery made all the difference. Ben nodded. She's not the only one who's noticing the difference you're making." That afternoon, Thomas Reeves sat in his office, stewing over the growing momentum behind Emily's proposals. He had been watching the changes unfold with a growing sense of unease. In his eyes, the old ways had worked just fine, and he resented the disruption Emily had caused. Reeves picked up the phone and called Mr. Harris. "This Carter woman is stirring the pot too much," he said, his voice clipped. "If we're not careful, she's going to turn this place upside down." Harris sighed on the other end of the line. "Reeves, I share some of your concerns, but we have to tread carefully. Carter has made a strong case, and the board is paying attention." Reeves leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. "This isn't over," he muttered. By the end of the week, the ripple effects of Emily's proposals were evident. Employees like Sarah began speaking up more, finding the courage to share their ideas and experiences. Even those who had initially resisted the changes started to reconsider as they witnessed the growing sense of possibility within the bank. Emily continued to refine her plans, drawing on feedback from the open forum and Ben's insights. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, but she also knew the seeds of change had been planted. As she walked through the lobby one evening, she paused by Ben's post. "Ben," she said, her voice warm, "thank you for everything you've done. I couldn't have gotten this far without you." Ben smiled faintly, his usual quiet demeanor softening. "You've done the hard part, Miss Carter. I'm just glad I could help." As Emily stepped outside into the cool evening air, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey was far from over, but the ripples of change were spreading, and with allies like Ben and Sarah by her side, she knew they could turn those ripples into waves. As the momentum behind Emily Carter's proposals grew, so did the resistance. For every employee who embraced the possibility of change, there were others who viewed her efforts as a threat to the familiar order. The whispers of dissent grew louder, and among the skeptics, Thomas Reeves emerged as an informal leader. Reeves had always thrived on the status quo. The unspoken hierarchies and exclusive culture at Regal Bank had served him well, cementing his position of authority. Emily's push for reforms felt like a direct challenge to his carefully curated world, and he wasn't about to let it unravel without a fight. Sitting in his office, Reeves reviewed the notes from Emily's latest forum. Sarah's story and the voices of other employees in support of change had stuck with him, but not in the way Emily might have hoped. To Reeves, they represented insubordination, a dangerous shift that could undermine his authority. He picked up the phone and called Mr. Harris. "Have you seen the feedback from Carter's little gathering?" Reeves asked, his tone dripping with disdain. Harris sighed on the other end of the line. "Yes, Thomas, and while I have my reservations, the board seems increasingly receptive to her ideas." Reeves scowled. "If we're not careful, Harris, she's going to turn this place upside down. We've been successful for decades because we uphold certain standards. Do you really think these changes will improve anything?" Harris paused before replying, his voice measured. "The board is still deliberating. For now, I suggest we proceed cautiously." Reeves hung up, frustration simmering. He knew "proceed cautiously" was corporate speak for "we're considering moving forward," and he couldn't stand the thought of Emily winning. Meanwhile, Emily was unaware of the brewing resistance. She was focused on refining her mentorship program, which aimed to provide underrepresented employees with opportunities for growth and leadership training. Sarah had volunteered to help coordinate the program, eager to contribute to something that resonated so deeply with her own experiences. Late one afternoon, Sarah knocked on Emily's office door, a stack of papers in her arms. "Ms. Carter, do you have a minute?" Sarah asked, stepping inside when Emily waved her in. "Of course, Sarah. What's on your mind?" Sarah set the papers down, her expression thoughtful. "I've been talking to some of the other employees about the mentorship program, and most of them are excited about it. But there are a few who..." Well, they don't see the point. Emily leaned back in her chair, nodding. What are they saying? They think it's unnecessary, Sarah said hesitantly. Some of them feel like they've earned their positions the hard way, and they don't see why others should get extra support. Emily frowned slightly, her mind working through the implications. It's not about giving anyone an unfair advantage, she said. It's about leveling the playing field. But I understand why they might feel that way. Change can be uncomfortable. Sarah nodded. I just thought you should know. I don't think they're against you personally. They just don't see the bigger picture yet. Thank you for telling me, Sarah, Emily said, her tone warm. It's important to address these concerns head-on. I'll schedule another forum to explain the program in more detail. While Emily worked to address the skepticism within her team, Reeves began quietly undermining her efforts. He approached employees one-on-one, planting seeds of doubt about the feasibility of her proposals. Do you really think all these changes are necessary? Reeves would ask, his tone conspiratorial. We've been successful for years without them. Sometimes it's better not to fix what isn't broken. His words found receptive ears among those who were already wary of change. Gradually, a small but vocal group of employees began pushing back, questioning the value of Emily's initiatives. One afternoon, Reeves cornered Sarah near the break room. I hear you've been working closely with Carter, Reeves said, his smile tight. Sarah tensed, but nodded. Yes, I have. Her proposals make a lot of sense. Reeves chuckled, shaking his head. You're young, Sarah. You haven't seen how things work in the long run. Trust me, these kinds of changes usually cause more problems than they solve. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. I think change is exactly what we need. Reeves's smile faltered for a moment before he shrugged. Suit yourself. Just don't say I didn't warn you. As he walked away, Sarah felt a mix of anger and determination. She wasn't about to let Reeves intimidate her, but his words had reminded her of just how entrenched the opposition was. The next day, Emily held another open forum, this time focused on the mentorship program. She explained its purpose and addressed some of the concerns Sarah had shared with her. The mentorship program isn't about favoritism, Emily said, her voice calm but firm. It's about creating opportunities for everyone to succeed. When we lift each other up, we all benefit. A few employees asked thoughtful questions, and Emily's responses seemed to ease some of their concerns. But as the forum progressed, she couldn't ignore the tension in the room. It was clear that Reeves' influence had taken hold in certain circles. Later that evening, Emily sat in her apartment, her mind heavy with the challenges ahead. She knew change was never easy, but the resistance she faced was more personal than she had anticipated. Her phone buzzed on the table, and she picked it up to see a text from Ben. Stay strong. The right people are noticing the difference you're making. Emily smiled, grateful for his steady support. Ben's kindness had been a beacon throughout this journey, reminding her that even the smallest acts of solidarity could make a profound impact. As she put down her phone, Emily resolved to keep pushing forward. The seeds of resistance may have been planted, but so too had the seeds of hope. Thomas Reeves paced his office, a storm of frustration brewing within him. Emily Carter's proposals were gaining traction despite his efforts to sow doubt. It seemed no matter how much he rallied resistance, her calm determination carried the day. The younger staff, especially, were drawn to her vision of a more inclusive workplace, leaving Reeves increasingly isolated among his peers. Reeves leaned against his desk, glaring at the neatly stacked reports before him. He had been at this bank for decades, rising through the ranks by playing the game as it had always been played. Now, Emily Carter was changing the rules, and he didn't like it. Down in the lobby, Ben Porter observed the subtle shifts in the bank's atmosphere. Employees who had once been indifferent now seemed divided. Some openly supported Emily's initiatives, While others whispered in hallways, clinging to the status quo, Ben's role as a quiet observer gave him unique insight, and he noticed how Reeves's influence had begun to wane among those who were starting to see the value in Emily's vision. Ben's respect for Emily had grown steadily since their first encounter. Her resilience reminded him of his late wife, Margaret, who had always believed in fighting for what was right. Margaret's passing had left a hole in Ben's life, but Emily's mission reignited something in him, a belief that even small acts of courage could ripple outward to create lasting change. Emily, meanwhile, was preparing for her next big move, a presentation to the board about the mentorship program and its long-term benefits. She had spent weeks gathering data, refining her arguments, and listening to feedback from employees like Sarah. On the morning of the presentation, as Emily walked through the lobby, she paused by Ben's post. "Morning, Ben," she said, her voice warm. "Morning, Ms. Carter," Ben replied with a nod. She hesitated, then added, "I just wanted to say thank you for everything. Your support has meant more than you know." Ben gave her a small smile. "You're the one doing the heavy lifting, ma'am. I'm just making sure you've got a clear path." Emily chuckled softly, the weight of the day ahead feeling just a little lighter. As Emily presented her mentorship program to the board, her tone was calm but passionate. She outlined the program's structure, emphasizing how it would provide employees with the tools to grow and thrive within the company. "This isn't just about helping individuals," Emily said, her gaze sweeping the room. "It's about strengthening the entire organization. When we invest in our people, we create a culture of loyalty, innovation, and excellence." Most of the board members listened intently, their expressions thoughtful, but Mr. Harris, ever the skeptic, raised a hand. "Mrs. Carter," he began, "while I see the potential benefits of your program, I also see the potential risks. Implementing something like this will take significant resources. Are you confident the return on investment will justify the cost?" Emily met his gaze without hesitation. "I am, Mr. Harris, and I believe the cost of not implementing this program is far greater. If we continue to overlook talent and potential within our own organization, we risk losing not only good employees, but also the trust of our clients." Harris nodded slowly, as if weighing her words. When the meeting ended, Emily left the boardroom feeling cautiously optimistic. The board hadn't made a final decision, but she sensed a shift in the room, a growing recognition that her ideas had merit. As the days passed, Emily's proposals began to take root. The mentorship program moved into a pilot phase, with Sarah among the first participants. The young teller threw herself into the program, grateful for the opportunity to grow and prove herself. But not everyone was pleased with the changes. Reeves, feeling his grip on the bank slipping, decided to confront Emily directly. One afternoon, he intercepted her in the hallway outside her office. "Ms. Carter," Reeves said, his tone clipped. "A word?" Emily turned to face him, her expression calm. "Of course, Mr. Reeves. What's on your mind?" Reeves folded his arms, his jaw tight. "I've been hearing a lot about your mentorship program. While I'm sure your intentions are good, I can't help but wonder if you've considered the unintended consequences." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Unintended consequences?" "Yes," Reeves said, his tone growing sharper. "This program could create division among the staff. Favoritism, resentment, these things have a way of undermining team cohesion." Emily's gaze didn't waver. "Mr. Reeves, this program isn't about favoritism, it's about providing equal opportunities for growth. And as for division, I believe it's our responsibility as leaders to bridge gaps, not widen them." Reeves bristled, but before he could respond, Ben appeared at the end of the hallway, his presence a quiet but unmistakable reminder that Emily was not alone. Reeves straightened, muttering a curt, "We'll see how this plays out," before walking away. Emily watched him go, her expression thoughtful. "Thank you, Ben," she said quietly. "Any time, ma'am," Ben replied, his calm demeanor hiding the fire of his loyalty. The turning point came a week later, during a staff meeting where Emily unveiled the results of the mentorship program's first phase. Employees like Sarah shared their experiences, speaking candidly about how the program had given them tools and confidence they hadn't thought possible. When Sarah stood up to speak, her voice trembled slightly at first, but grew stronger with every word. "I used to think I didn't belong here," Sarah said, her gaze sweeping the room. "But this program has shown me that I do. It's shown me that my voice matters, and so does everyone else's." The room erupted into applause, and for the first time, Emily saw cracks in the resistance. Even some of Reeves's staunchest allies seemed moved by Sarah's words. Reeves, sitting near the back of the room, looked visibly uncomfortable. He crossed his arms, his jaw tight, but he couldn't deny the shift in the room. As the meeting ended, Ben approached Emily, his expression unreadable. "You did good, ma'am," he said quietly. "We did good," Emily corrected, a small smile playing at her lips. Ben chuckled softly. "Fair enough." That evening, as Emily walked through the lobby, she paused by Ben's post once more. "Ben," she said, "you're more than just support. You're a hero in all of this." Ben shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "Not a hero, ma'am. Just a man trying to do the right thing." Emily nodded, her heart full. "Sometimes that's all it takes." Emily Carter sat at her desk, gazing at the glowing city lights through her office window. The past few weeks had been transformative, but also exhausting. The mentorship program was gaining momentum, and employees like Sarah were proving that change was not only possible, but impactful. Yet, resistance persisted, a shadow lingering just beyond her progress. She sighed, leaning back in her chair. The confrontation with Thomas Reeves still replayed in her mind. His veiled threats and attempts to undermine her work had only hardened her resolve, but she knew he wouldn't give up easily. She couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was brewing. Meanwhile, Reeves was plotting his next move. He had been emboldened by a handful of employees who shared his distaste for the changes Emily was spearheading. Among them were a few longtime staff members who feared losing their privileged positions in the bank's unspoken hierarchy. That evening, Reeves met with two of his allies in the dimly lit corner of a nearby cafe. "This Carter woman is disrupting everything we've built," Reeves said, his voice low but sharp. "We can't let her continue unchecked." One of the men, a mid-level manager named Greg, nodded. "But what can we do? The board seems to be on her side now." Reeves smirked. "We don't need the board to stop her. All we need is to discredit her. If we can make it look like she's overstepping or mismanaging resources, they'll have no choice but to pull the plug on her proposals." The other man, an operations supervisor named Richard, shifted uncomfortably. "Are you sure about this, Thomas? What if it backfires?" "It won't," Reeves said confidently. "Trust me, by the time we're done, Carter won't have a leg to stand on." Unaware of Reeves's scheming, Emily continued her work with determination. She spent hours refining the mentorship program and preparing for its expansion. Her meetings with employees became more frequent, and her focus on building trust and transparency only grew stronger. One morning, as she entered the bank, Ben Porter stopped her at the entrance. "Ms. Carter," he said, his tone quiet but serious. "Can we talk for a moment?" "Of course, Ben," Emily said, sensing his unease. Ben motioned for her to step aside, away from the bustling lobby. "I've been hearing whispers," he said. "Reeves and a few others are planning something. I don't know the details, but it doesn't sound good." Emily frowned, her mind racing. "Do you think it's about the mentorship program?" "Most likely," Ben said. "They've been grumbling about it ever since it started. I just thought you should know." Emily nodded, her gratitude evident in her expression. "Thank you, Ben. I'll keep an eye out." A few days later, Emily received an anonymous email containing accusations that she had misallocated funds for the mentorship program. The email claimed that resources meant for other departments had been funneled into her initiative without proper approval. Her heart sank as she read the message. She knew the claims were false, but the implications could derail everything she had worked for. Emily immediately forwarded the email to the board, attaching a detailed breakdown of the program's funding to prove her transparency. She also requested an emergency meeting to address the allegations directly. The meeting was tense from the start. The board members sat around the long mahogany table, their expressions ranging from concern to skepticism. Thomas Reeves sat off to the side, his face carefully neutral but his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Emily stood at the head of the table, her demeanor calm but firm. "I want to address the accusations that have been made against me," she began. "The mentorship program's funding has been handled with complete transparency. I've provided a detailed report outlining every dollar spent, and I welcome any additional scrutiny the board deems necessary." She handed out copies of the report, her voice steady as she continued. "These allegations are baseless, and I believe they're an attempt to discredit the work we're doing to create a more inclusive and equitable environment." Mr. Harris, who had been a vocal skeptic in the past, studied the report closely. After a long pause, he looked up at Emily. "Ms. Carter," he said, his tone measured, "your report appears thorough, and I see no evidence of wrongdoing. However, these accusations raise an important question. Who is trying to undermine your work, and why?" Emily glanced briefly at Reeves, whose expression remained inscrutable. "I can't say for certain, Mr. Harris," she replied, "but I believe these efforts stem from a resistance to change. The mentorship program challenges a culture that has been entrenched for decades, and not everyone is comfortable with that." The room fell silent as her words hung in the air. Mrs. Donovan, one of Emily's staunchest allies on the board, spoke up. "I agree with Ms. Carter. This bank has thrived for years, but that doesn't mean it's perfect. Change is necessary, and we can't let fear of discomfort derail progress." Several board members nodded in agreement, though a few still appeared hesitant. After the meeting, Emily returned to her office, emotionally drained but resolute. She knew she had defended herself well, but the experience had shaken her. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling as the weight of the day pressed down on her. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Ben. "I heard about the meeting," he said, stepping inside. "How are you holding up?" Emily offered a tired smile. "I've been better, but I think the board is starting to see through Reeves's games." Ben nodded, his expression serious. "Reeves isn't going to stop, but neither should you." Emily chuckled softly. "I don't plan to." That evening, Sarah stopped by Emily's office, a hesitant smile on her face. "Ms. Carter," she said, "I just wanted to say thank you for fighting for all of us, even when it's hard." Emily's heart swelled at Sarah's words. "Thank you, Sarah. People like you are the reason I'm doing this." As Sarah left, Emily sat in her office, reflecting on the challenges she had faced and the allies she had gained. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone in this fight. The tension at Regal Bank was palpable in the days following the board meeting. Emily Carter's composed defense against the allegations had shifted the conversation, casting doubt on Thomas Reeves and his quiet circle of dissenters. But for Emily, the relief was tempered with the knowledge that her fight wasn't over. Thomas Reeves sat in his office, seething. His plan to discredit Emily had failed, and now he found himself under scrutiny. Word of the anonymous email had spread among the staff, and while no one openly accused him, there was an undeniable shift in how people regarded him. The respect he had once commanded seemed to erode by the day. He glanced at the small mirror on his desk, adjusting his tie. For the first time in years, he felt the creeping weight of vulnerability. Meanwhile, Emily continued her work with unwavering focus. She knew the mentorship program was just the beginning of the change Regal Bank needed. She scheduled additional forums and met with employees to discuss their concerns and aspirations. During one of these sessions, Sarah stood up again to share her experience. "When I joined this program, I wasn't sure what to expect," Sarah began, her voice steady but emotional. "But it's given me confidence I never knew I had. It's shown me that I'm not just here to do a job, I'm here to grow." Her words were met with applause, and Emily couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. Sarah's transformation was a testament to what the mentorship program could achieve. As the employees filed out, Ben approached Emily with his usual calm demeanor. "You're making progress," he said. "We're making progress," Emily corrected with a smile. Ben nodded, but his expression was more serious than usual. "Be ready, though. Change like this stirs up more than just hope, it stirs up fear. People like Reeves aren't used to feeling threatened." "I know," Emily replied, "but I'm not backing down." That evening, Reeves sat alone in his office, the faint hum of the building's air conditioning the only sound. He stared at a file on his desk, his personnel record. He had been at Regal Bank for over 2 decades, climbing the ranks through a combination of skill, connections, and an unyielding belief in his own authority. But now, everything felt uncertain. The culture he had helped maintain was being questioned, and his tactics to protect it were backfiring. For the first time, he began to wonder if he had miscalculated not just with Emily, but with himself. His thoughts drifted back to something Ben Porter had said during a passing conversation the previous week. "Sometimes doing the right thing means rethinking the way you've always done it." At the time, Reeves had dismissed the comment as naive. But now, as he sat in the quiet of his office, the words took on a weight he couldn't ignore. The next morning, Reeves did something he hadn't done in years. He walked through the lobby and stopped at Ben's post. "Porter," Reeves said, his tone hesitant. Ben looked up from his clipboard, his expression unreadable. "Morning, Mr. Reeves. What can I do for you?" Reeves hesitated, then asked, "Do you have a minute to talk?" Ben nodded slowly, motioning toward a quieter corner of the lobby. Reeves folded his arms, avoiding Ben's gaze. "I've been thinking about what you said last week, about rethinking the way things have always been done." Ben tilted his head slightly. "What about it?" Reeves exhaled sharply. "You've been here a long time. You've seen how this place works. Do you really believe all this? Change is what we need?" Ben met Reeves's gaze steadily. "I do. And deep down, I think you do too." Reeves frowned but didn't argue. Instead, he said, "I've made some mistakes, big ones. I'm not sure how to fix them." Ben's expression softened, though his tone remained firm. "The first step is owning them. The second is doing better. It's not easy, but it's worth it." Reeves nodded slowly, his mind racing. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that he could be part of the solution instead of the problem. Later that day, Reeves approached Emily outside the conference room where she was preparing for a meeting. "Miss Carter," he said, his tone cautious. Emily turned to face him, her expression guarded. "Mr. Reeves, what can I do for you?" Reeves cleared his throat. "I wanted to apologize for how I've treated you and for other things." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Other things?" Reeves shifted uncomfortably. "Let's just say I haven't made it easy for you. But I realize now that I've been wrong. Your ideas, they're good for this bank. And I'd like to support them, if you'll let me." Emily studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said, "I appreciate the apology, Mr. Reeves, but actions speak louder than words. If you're serious about supporting change, then show me." Reeves nodded, a flicker of respect crossing his face. "I will." In the days that followed, Reeves began taking steps to make amends. He spoke openly at staff meetings, admitting his mistakes and expressing support for Emily's initiatives. His transformation wasn't instant, nor was it universally accepted, but it was genuine. Employees who had once rallied behind Reeves began to reconsider their positions, seeing his shift as a sign that the bank's culture truly was changing. For Emily, Reeves's redemption was unexpected but welcome. It reinforced her belief that even those most resistant to change could find a way forward. One afternoon, as Emily walked through the lobby, she stopped by Ben's post. "Ben," she said, "did you have something to do with Reeves's change of heart?" Ben shrugged, a faint smile playing at his lips. "I just gave him something to think about. The rest was up to him." Emily chuckled softly. "You're a quiet hero, Ben. Don't think I don't see it." Ben shook his head, his expression humble. "Just doing what's right, ma'am." As Emily left the bank that evening, she felt a deep sense of hope. The journey had been long and difficult, but the changes taking root at Regal Bank were real. And for the first time, it felt like the entire organization, Thomas Reeves included, was moving forward together. The transformation at Regal Bank was undeniable. The mentorship program had expanded, bringing more employees into its fold, and the atmosphere in the building had shifted from tension to cautious optimism. Emily Carter walked through the lobby each morning, greeted by nods, smiles, and even occasional words of encouragement. The culture she had fought so hard to change was beginning to reflect the values of equity and respect that she had envisioned. Thomas Reeves, once the face of resistance, had become an unexpected advocate for change. His journey from skeptic to supporter wasn't without its bumps. Some employees still eyed him with mistrust, while others were slow to embrace his new attitude. But Reeves had committed himself to earning back the respect he had lost, starting with small gestures that mirrored the lessons he had learned from Emily and Ben. One afternoon, Reeves stopped by Sarah's workstation. "Sarah," he began, his voice softer than she was used to hearing, "I wanted to say that your speech during the mentorship forum was powerful. You've come a long way." Sarah blinked in surprise before offering a tentative smile. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves. That means a lot." "It's Thomas," he said, his tone lighter. "And if there's ever anything you need, my door is open." As Reeves walked away, Sarah exchanged a look with her colleague Julie, who raised her eyebrows in astonishment. "Who would have thought?" Julie murmured, her voice tinged with disbelief. Meanwhile, Ben Porter watched these changes unfold with quiet satisfaction. The lobby he had patrolled for years felt different now, not just a place of transactions and hierarchy, but a space where people were beginning to connect and grow. He often thought about Emily's role in sparking this transformation and how her courage had inspired not just him, but an entire organization. One morning, as Ben adjusted his badge, Emily approached him with a warm smile. "Ben," she said, her tone thoughtful, "I've been thinking about everything that's happened over the past few months. None of it would have been possible without you." Ben tilted his head, his expression modest. "I didn't do much, ma'am. You're the one who led the charge." "You did more than you realize," Emily replied. "You showed me the importance of kindness. When I first walked into this bank, I felt like an outsider, but you made me feel seen, and that made all the difference." Ben looked down for a moment, his lips curving into a faint smile. "Sometimes all it takes is a little kindness, ma'am. You reminded me of that too." The ripple effects of Emily's leadership extended beyond the walls of the bank. The mentorship program had gained attention in the community, and several other businesses reached out to learn more about implementing similar initiatives. Emily's efforts had turned Regal Bank into a model for how organizations could evolve to meet the challenges of a changing world. One afternoon, a representative from a local nonprofit approached Emily after a speaking event she had been invited to. "Ms. Carter," the woman said, extending her hand, "your work has been an inspiration. We're launching a career development program for underserved youth, and we'd love to partner with you." Emily smiled, shaking her hand. "I'd be honored. Let's make it happen." Back at the bank, the mentorship program's success had transformed Sarah from a quiet employee into a confident leader. She had recently been promoted to assistant manager of her department, a role she never would have imagined for herself before. One evening, as she packed up her desk, Sarah caught sight of Reeves walking past. On impulse, she called out to him. "Thomas," she said, still getting used to the informality, "I just wanted to say, I appreciate the changes you've made. It's made a difference for all of us." Reeves paused, his expression softening. "Thank you, Sarah. That means more than you know." Emily's influence even reached the boardroom, where Mr. Harris had become one of her most vocal supporters. During a quarterly review meeting, he praised her work, acknowledging that his initial skepticism had been misplaced. "I'll admit," Harris said, addressing the room, "I didn't fully understand the importance of Ms. Carter's proposals when she first presented them. But seeing the results, I can confidently say she was right. Change isn't just necessary, it's transformative." The board members nodded in agreement, their respect for Emily evident. On a crisp autumn morning, Emily stood outside the bank, watching as employees and clients moved in and out of the building. The air was filled with the hum of activity, but also something deeper, a sense of purpose and connection that hadn't been there before. Ben approached her, his hands in his pockets. "Beautiful morning," he remarked. "It is," Emily agreed, turning to face him. "And it feels like we've come a long way." Ben nodded. "You've done something remarkable here, Miss Carter." "We've done something remarkable," Emily corrected, her eyes warm. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sunlight glint off the bank's glass doors. "What's next for you?" Ben asked. Emily smiled, her gaze thoughtful. "There's always more to do, more people to lift up, more systems to improve, but for now, I'm going to savor this moment." Ben chuckled softly. "Well, if you ever need a security guard to watch your back, you know where to find me." Emily laughed, the sound light and full of hope. "I'll hold you to that." As Emily walked into the bank, the morning sunlight streaming behind her, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been long and difficult, filled with challenges and resistance, but it had also been filled with unexpected kindness, resilience, and hope. She knew the work wasn't over. There would always be more barriers to break, more minds to change, and more lives to uplift. But for the first time, she felt confident that she wasn't walking the path alone. Kindness had brought her here, and kindness would carry her forward. Emily's journey reminds us that resilience, kindness, and a commitment to doing what is right can overcome even the most entrenched challenges. From unexpected allies like Ben to transformations like Thomas Reeves's redemption, this story shows the power of individuals to inspire change when they stand together. If you've enjoyed this story and its message of hope, perseverance, and inclusivity, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little inspiration today, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this. Together, we can spread positivity and create ripples of kindness in the world. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.